I'm Reverend Kennetha Bigham-Tsai, Chief Connectional Ministries Officer of the Connectional Table. Wesley's historic questions were about what to teach, how to teach, and what to do. For this interval of features, the emerging forum will seek to update these questions for our current moment. We will invite energetic conversation that will illumine our identity, which is tied to what and how we teach, our preferred actions, what we do, and our abiding hopes as we envision the future United Methodist Church. Welcome, Reverend Ole Birch. So glad to have you here with us. Ole is a member of the Connectional Table and is a local church pastor. But tell us more. Tell our audience about your ministry and the context in which you serve.
Thank you, Kennetha. A privilege to be here. I serve in the annual conference in Denmark, a country in Northern Europe. A small minority church in a sea of Lutherans, you could say. I serve a city church in our capital of Copenhagen, an old building, an old congregation, more than 150 years, which is an exciting place to be, and it has a glorious history of social outreach programs, of music and small groups, and all the things that I'm sure our viewers know from Methodist church life.
You have a wonderful gospel choir too, don't you?
We actually have 3 of them, yeah.
It's wonderful, wonderful. So tell me, what do you see as the markers of United Methodism in your context? If someone in your context looks and says, that's a United Methodist, what do they see?
Well, it's really a difficult question, more difficult than you might think, because being such a small minority, very few people know of us. So they would say, what? Metho what? But those who know something about us would I hope would say that we do a model of church that focuses very much on community, on social responsibility, and worship that is welcoming for everybody.
Tell me, how has your ministry changed, or how have the needs of your community and of your ministry been altered by COVID-19?
There's layers of how it has changed or what it has meant for us. There are theological reflections, there are philosophical reflections, there are practical issues. I think if I to sort of give you an idea of what I see, I would say that the first thing it has done for all of us is that it has made us aware of how fragile we are. That this wonderful world we have built and these wonderful societies, that a virus in such a short time could have such devastating effects all over the world and even in our world. So I think there's been a sort of a shaking up of people that, wow, can this really happen? And it actually does. It has atomized our community, meaning that the solitude, the distance we've had to put between us physically has made us lonely and yearn and long for fellowship, for a hug, for a smile, for a coffee at a corner shop, for all the things that we have taken granted. And in our community, in my local church in Copenhagen, it is clear that the people are, we call it in Danish, skin hungry. They long for touching somebody, just saying hello, shaking hands, and there's that desire to be together. And the longing for it. And then practically, it has challenged us to use medias like the one we're using now, challenged us to go online with worship and small groups and board meetings. But I think that's really also an area where I see that the churches in my context has picked up the challenge and has actually managed within a very short time to learn and to be in process in learning how to use these medias that are at our disposals.
And that certainly is something that that the pandemic has taught us that something of our own resilience and our own adaptability. What else do you see that we have learned from the pandemic, or that the pandemic has taught us or has revealed about us or about the world?
I would say two things, one positive and one not so positive. The positive thing that we have learned is how important community is, and how lonely we get without it, and how we lose touch with who we should be when we are not together. Community simply has I think a larger and more important function in our identities than we perhaps realized before. Now that it's taken away from us, it hurts. So I think that's the one thing. The other thing that it's taught us is that in a crisis, our societies, there's a strong tendency to look out for number one, to look out for yourself. And I see this in the politics that we have seen unfold in the area of vaccines, for instance, that it is really hard for rich and affluent societies to share when there is a demand for a quick fix for everybody right away.
And certainly we both live in countries where the vaccine is available, and there are countries where United Methodists are, and others where the vaccines are hardly available at all. And it certainly has revealed that disparity. In terms of the pandemic, it has also forced us to change the cadence of our governance. It's forced us to postpone General Conference twice now until 2022. In these uncertain times, what do you think we need to do differently in order to sustain vital, relevant, and effective ministry in the United Methodist Church? And speak specifically to your context.
Well, first, about the postponement of General Conference, I think it reveals and it leaves us with a problem that we have already been talking about for some time, namely the issue of center and periphery in our global church. That the center in our present structure, the center is so important that when it can't function, which it can't right now, at least the major part of the center is General Conference, and it can't function, then we are left without governance. Then we are left without that which should be the place where we make decisions. And that is a big problem, because we have such a focus on the center, and the center is so clearly geographically and financially defined as it is today. So on a global scale, I think this has reinforced my support for the Christmas Covenant and for a more regionalized form of governance in our church that can function even though we can't travel as much, and has the ability to give guidance and policies for the work in the region that it has responsibility for. So I think that's one thing that this situation has actually taught us, that we are pretty handicapped when we have to meet like that to do anything.
Right. And you talk about the center in two ways here, Ole. You talk about it as a geographical center, and certainly on the Connectional Table, we talked a lot about the fact that we say we're a worldwide denomination or a global denomination, but we're very U.S.-centric in reality. But you also talk about it in terms of a governance center. So much focus and attention being placed upon General Conference. You mentioned certainly legislation like the Christmas covenant perhaps impacts both of those. But as a person, as a European, how do you experience that? And granted, a lot of folks who will be watching this video will be from the U.S. and don't have the perspective that you bring from your context. So as a European, what's wrong with there being a center?
Well, culture matters. There's a famous thing that says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I mean, we can have any strategy and we can try to be global in our approach. That's all very nice, but if it doesn't adapt to the culture where we exist everywhere, then it's gonna disappear, because culture eats strategies for breakfast. And if we don't recognize that to a higher degree than we have done, then we are going to be ineffective in the future. I think that the idea that we move decisions closer to the place where these decisions have effect is the right idea. We need Africans to decide about how the church should function in Africa, and we need Europeans to decide how we can function in Europe, because we know our own culture, we live it, and we are immersed in it, so we can incarnate the message and the life and the ministry of our church in this part of the world. I think I have met so many brilliant people in my years in the Connectional Table from the US, and I consider them to be experts in the church in the US. But I've also had to struggle with trying to give them an image of what's it like in Europe, what's it like in Copenhagen to be a Methodist, and to inform them and to give them an image of what I have to, what my mission is like. And if they presume that they can guide my mission in Copenhagen from a global body, then that simply doesn't work.
So you're talking about being still a global church, but being more regional in our governance, more regional in our ministry and focus due to the cultural and contextual differences, basically allowing context to shape ministry. So in a global church, then what still keeps us connected?
That's a very good question. And I think actually we have been working on that question on a global level, especially through the work that the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters has been doing on a general book of discipline, where the attempt has been to say, can we say these parts are the core parts of what Methodism is about? These are what we cannot let go of and still call ourselves Methodists. So these things which are core to our beliefs and our ministry, I think these are fit for being a global issue. And that of course is our Wesleyan theology. It is our history and traditions, and it's a lot of issues that have been said to be in this general part of the future, perhaps future book of discipline.
So what do you see as the priorities as you look forward? What should be the priorities that would guide us as a church within the next year to 2 years? What do you see as what we should prioritize? And right now we're kind of in this holding pattern. So what would you see that we should prioritize in the next year to 2 years?
Do you mean before we have another general conference?
Even before we have another general conference, yes.
To do ministry wherever we are, in a way that is creative and to invite people to be part of our community. I don't know that we can do that much to fix our church the next year and a half. We are in a holding pattern, as you said, but we have to prepare and work with it. And we are actually here in Europe. We are we're trying to look at ourselves and the way we work, and how Europe is organized. We are, as you know, right now, 3 central conferences and 4 different bishops in Europe, and our challenges are very specific to the geography and structure of our church, with the many nations and languages, and the many cultures, and everywhere very small churches. So I think our priority is to do what we do, and do it as well as possible, and to get out of this pandemic. And we are very I don't know if I should say anxious, but we are very occupied with what is going to happen now that we open up again, because we are approaching a place where we can open up our societies and churches fully again. And will the people come back, or will they be running to come back? And what will ministry be like? Will it just be like before, or will something have happened? So I think we are very much immersed in this COVID-19 conversation with ourselves. So I don't think we are very occupied with what could happen, but in our church, but with how do we open again?
Right, and dealing with the pandemic now, and then dealing with the after effects of the pandemic, or the fact that when we talk about getting back to normal, we might not really ever get back to what we considered normal before.
Exactly, yeah.
So let's move to the local church level, and you're a local church pastor. What do you see as essential, absolutely essential for ministry in the local church?
Openness to the people that are around us in our setting. That's really important. I think many churches have had to struggle with this issue and have created sort of a we are happy to be just us culture. I think a willingness to learn and to evolve is important for us, because one thing that this pandemic has taught us is that things are not just going to be like they always were. The challenges will come up, and a readiness to learn and to evolve is always important. And then as always, an intelligent and caring way to communicate our gospel. I think those 3 things, yeah.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what sort of spiritual leadership do you hope to see emerge in the church in the next decade? You know, you think about, you've talked about kind of big global issues around decentralization, more localized ministry, more culturally contextual ministry. You've also talked about the ministry of the local church, reaching out to the community, dealing with what it will be like after COVID, really figuring out how do we invite people and return people to the touch of the church. So when you think about all that you said, what sort of leadership gets us there? What sort of leadership do you hope emerges in the next decade?
I think there's 2 things I would love to see stronger in our leadership for the future. And one is not a new thing, but a very old thing, namely a Wesleyan approach to salvation, to ministry, and to theology. That's sort of classic Wesleyan. I'm very much a Wesleyan myself, and we all like to see ourselves reproduced. But the other one, which is equally important, is a way of approaching ministry where you're always curious about what God is doing now or doing next. Because I think the mission theology people who says that it's God's mission are right, and that he is never lazy and he doesn't stop. And one of the major tasks of leadership is to understand and observe what God is doing, and get the church involved in it. So an approach to ministry where you're always curious of what is God doing now, and get involved with that.
And it sounds like you're also saying being able to inspire other people to be involved in that and to equip.
To tell the story of what God is doing and invite people to get involved. Exactly. Yeah.
So how will what we have learned from ministry during the pandemic change our models of leadership? Do you think that in terms of what we thought about leadership being, that it will change because of what we have learned from the pandemic?
Yeah, those are really, really big questions. I've tried to ponder on them, and I've come up with three things I think I want to give as my answer to that question. I don't know exactly how these models are going to look for the future, and I don't presume to be able to describe them. But I think we can turn it around and says there are things that we must rid ourselves of. We must rid ourselves of models of leadership that forgets that we are fragile and need the grace of God and each other. That's models of leadership that can't do that. We can't use them in the future. And secondly, I think that we've got to rid ourselves of models of leadership that ignores that we must have community and not be torn apart. We need each other. And models of leadership that will divide us or separate us in any way, they're not useful to us. They don't help. And lastly, I think that we could do well in ridding ourselves of models of leadership that cannot adapt to new challenges and therefore becomes a burden to the people and to the people of God. So those would be my three things.
That's wonderful. I mean, certainly the pandemic has taught us how fragile we are. We may have thought that we may not have known that before this pandemic, but we are indeed fragile, and the need for community and connectionalism, which is at one of the hallmarks of Wesleyan theology, an idea of we are better together, we are stronger together. And then this whole idea of being able to adapt to change, because we have been constantly, it is the one constant, is that things are changing, and to grow, we've got to change. So there is one question that has been in the back of my mind. Tell me about the 3 gospel choirs and how that developed in your church. I certainly don't think that most people in the U.S. would know that, or would think that a church in Copenhagen would have 3 gospel choirs. But tell me about that.
Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, a choir director, classical trained choir director from my church, spent half a year in the U.S. He was a classically trained organist and composer, but once he got to the U.S., he got very, very interested in African American gospel music. So he spent his time there studying that, and then he went back home, and the youth choir we had at that time in the church, he was the leader of that, and he changed that into a gospel choir that sang exclusively African American gospel music. And together with other factors in the Danish society, some Americans living here as well, he started what became a wave of gospel choirs, so that there are 180 to 200 gospel choirs in Little Denmark today. And 3 of them belong in my church, and it has been a cultural phenomenon over the last that period, the 90s and the first part of the 21st century that we have experienced. Gospel music has been very popular as choir music.
And I know one of your choirs, didn't one of your choirs perform at a general conference?
Yes, the gospel choir Kefas has performed twice, I think, at general conferences, and were invited to the last one as well, but that didn't occur. And the other choirs have also traveled, one of them also to the US, and had the great experience both of traveling and visiting United Methodist churches in the US that were predominantly white, and singing as a white choir African American gospel music in their worship services, and even more exciting, visiting black churches as a white choir singing African American gospel music, and being very anxious to understand how that would be received at all, but were welcomed to an enormous degree with great hospitality and enthusiasm. So they have had great times, both in the U.S., in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere in Europe. So that's part of the story about the gospel music. His name, the founder of these choirs, is Peter Steinvey. He's a great man.
That's wonderful. And I believe we heard a gospel choir when the Connectional Table met in Oslo, Norway.
Oh yes, there's gospel choirs in most European countries today.
Yep. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, is there anything else that I haven't asked that you would want to say?
No, I think that we're good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.